It's the Christian Nomad here on my Comic Nomad channel. So this channel is going to be where I talk about art and entertainment and all the other stuff, which I've been doing, but just very sporadically. But I'm going to try and get a lot more content put out these days. However, we're going to be talking about the art of storytelling, and specifically in this occasion, what I'm going to be discussing is the idea of women as the heroine or women as the main character in a movie. Now, or anything, art, storytelling. I'm doing this because I just watched a live stream with Liam Gray, and I forget who all was on it. He had Omega Chan was on it, and somebody else, and I'm the creator of Fiendish was on it. It's coming back to me as I think about it. But I do remember listening to it. But towards the end, they started talking about the fact that, for the most part, people don't like women as females as the lead character. Naturally, they gravitate towards men as the protagonist, as the main character. And while that's true, that's very true. That's sort of a default position. And if you're going to have a female lead, you're going to sort of have a harder time getting an audience or getting a true following, or people to really get into the story as it is for men. And we're going to talk about why that is for a second. Now, the thing about this is more about human beings than it is about storytelling. It's ingrained in us, right, that men are adventurers, that men are the ones who build things. It's just sort of how it's been. Whether you agree that's how it should be or not is not, that's not in the picture here. The point is how it's been for the past 4,000 or 5,000 years. And, about 3,000 years ago, the Greeks kind of codified how to tell a story, and that's where we get our idea of the multi-act structure and the arc. And so, and just real quickly, you basically have one of two basic ideas for a hero's journey. You either have somebody comes out of nothing or nowhere or obscurity, and they face a major threat, and then they are beaten down from this, and they overcome and they succeed. Or you have somebody who is great, who is in some way, has it taken from them, or is beaten down, or loses something valuable, and then gets to come back and succeed and have that sort of revenge plot, or just the overcoming of something really, really deep and difficult. That's generally the hero's journey as a very, very basic. I mean, you can watch the Fourth Age. He does a lot on that storytelling, and he's really good at it, and he explains it in real good depth. But it's based out of our own psyche, out of how we perceive the world around us and the things that we experienced and have experienced. And we are just sort of predisposed to certain ideas, and they feel more familiar to us, and they're easier to do. So it's kind of very easy to tell the basic hero's journey story with a guy that's, whatever, farm boy who the dragon shows up and destroys something, kills his parents, and he has to become a great swordsman and overcome, and he goes out and he fights, and maybe he makes things worse because now the dragon comes back and destroys the whole village instead of just his parents, and people are down on him, and he has to go out again, and this time he has to bring his companions along with him, and eventually he gets to overcome this threat that he couldn't have even imagined overcoming at the beginning, and he becomes a hero, and he succeeds. Again, a lot of this is just archetypal stuff that we have in our psyche, in our brains, and it bases around what we see around us. And this is one of these things where, again, it's not, this is not, I'm not being sexist when I say this, but guys in particular, but people in general, don't like to see women hurt or tortured or really, beaten or put in a very low state. It makes you feel bad. It really does. And you say, well, you feel bad for guys. You do, but it's not quite the same thing. You feel bad for him, but it's a different sense when it's a woman or when it's a female, because we have it ingrained in us, especially men have it ingrained in you, that you want to protect a woman. A woman should be protected. She shouldn't have to be going through these sorts of things. Which is why, if done correctly, it can actually be a very good story to have a female as the lead. And the idea, though, is there are certain ways to do this. Okay. So I'm going to point out that I pointed out during the stream that Vinnie Tartamella succeeded in making women as his main hero and his main focal point of his movies, or of his comics. They could be movies because they're detailed enough. But the thing he does is, and the reason why he succeeded where others fail, is that he crafted a really good story around the character. There are features, there are things, there's this post-apocalyptic sort of dystopian idea, and then you take, this like zombified sort of thing with City of Venus, where it's sort of these monsters, and then you take female characters, and you have to have very good three-dimensional female characters. These cannot be just, oh, she's a woman, oh, she's pretty, oh, she fights well. No, it has to be someone who has motivation. She has to have a reason why she fights. She has to have a thing that happened to her that makes her overcome. She has to have a chance of losing. And in this, there is idea that she could lose at some point. And that's how he sort of fits it. And there's a real possibility that they're going to lose. That there's, even when the character is overcoming, it's not done in a ridiculous way. It's done in a very realistic way. The woman uses her speed or her agility, or that she's smaller and she can sort of move and maneuver to her benefit, or that she's really smart and she can outlast. And then likewise, they have technology, guns and various things. Plus there's an army at one point in City of Venus that sort of comes out, and they're fighting along an army. And these are three-dimensional characters that are very motivated, and they're put into a good story. The story has to be good, or else it won't work. You can't just say, okay, here's a woman, she's down on her luck, and then she gets better and overcomes. It has to be a good story. You can say that about all men, men too. That's true, but the issue is, and the reason why people struggle with this, is that a lot of times we tend to treat women with kids' gloves. We say, we don't like to see them beat and battered and abused, and therefore they don't really get beat up the way that a guy does. In some of the James Bond films, he gets legitimately beat up. He doesn't just get his hair tousled. He's bloodied up and thrown in a jail cell. And a perfect example of how to do like a movie well that gives an illustration that we'll all probably have heard and know of before is Alien, where Alien, the character of Ripley, was written genderless. There's no male or female. The idea is the story is a situation of a bunch of basically truck drivers out in space who are waking up after this being in, put to sleep, and they, for an extended period of time, and they come back. And all the characters are very abrasive and, kind of vulgar, and like you would see at a truck stop. These are truck drivers, basically. These are, they've got all the jokes and the crude humor, and Ripley is, though she's thin and waif-like, she's tall. So Sigourney Weaver is like 6'1", 6'2". She's a big woman, and she's just very assertive, and she is who she is, and she's very aggressive, but she still gets beaten down. There's a scene that I know a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's just gratuitous because she's in her underwear, and so those tiny little underwear that barely cover her. That's a symbolic thing of her, that she was stripped down and all the layers are taken off and it's just her. And from this point forward, you remember, Alien is basically like a psychological thriller. There's this creature, there's this thing, they're hunting it, and it's hunting them, and you can't really see it, it's in the shadows, and there's the lighting issues, and there's the cat, and she is in this story, and she's a very strong character. But the character was written genderless. It could be anybody. Sigourney Weaver just happened to be the perfect person for that character, and she plays the character well, and she's an amazing talent. And they didn't pull any punches. They don't avoid knocking her around or putting her in terrible situations. The thing is, they let her be intelligent and resourceful and be clever in a good story that really has it's a large cast. It is an ensemble up until the very end when she's the lone survivor, essentially. So that works. That's how that works, because the story has to be really good and the character just has to fit. And you have to do things to the character that allows people to see that she is human, that she does get knocked around, that she is scared, that she does have something to lose. But like, that's why a character like a Captain Marvel, if you read a Captain Marvel comic, it's not any good because there's never a chance she's going to lose. There's never a real threat that she's going to be defeated. She's never beaten up and torn down. You look at Superman, and he's Superman. He should legitimately, based upon the skill, everything they've given him, he can just destroy the world anytime he wants. And yet he gets beat up. His cape gets ripped, and he gets thrown around, and he gets beaten down to a pulp before eventually coming back and overcoming. See, that's the difference between a Captain Marvel type of thing and a Wolverine, or the idea of how they're treating Jean Grey these days versus a Superman character or a Batman character, where they deconstruct them and put them back together again. Now, there's another way to do this story well, and Vinnie Tartamella, of all people, did it again, and that is Through the Woods is a perfect example of this. And this is that the story is the story. The story happens. And the female lead is the catalyst that we experience the story through. See, she takes the place of us. We're seeing everything through her eyes. See, she doesn't know all the stuff. Just like we don't know all the stuff. And as things are revealed to her, they're revealed to us. And therefore, she is guiding us through this story. She is our eyes. She is our catalyst. So in reality, the story is not really about her. She is in the story. And she guides us through the story, which Through the Woods was really good. It was short. I would have preferred it be another issue or too long, but it's really good. The art is top notch as well. But the character is there to guide us to when something happens to her, it's happening to us in the story. The story is this, ancient tale and this mythical sort of thing that she is uncovering, and she's uncovering it, and we're going along with the ride with her. We're together with it. In this case, her character is also very well written because she is a sort of surrogate mother in a way. She's actually like an older sister, But the older sister character is the surrogate mother in a lot of stories. And she is our pathway into the story. But the story has to be good by itself. So are you noticing something? In all cases, male or female, the story has to be good, right? That's the bottom line. The story is the story. But, like in this case, the reason why it works is because not a lot has to happen to her. You don't have to beat her down and destroy her and beat her to a pulp, because the story isn't really about her. It's about something else, and she's uncovering it, and she is showing it to us. And essentially, it's a story. It's a bedtime story. It's a slightly scary bedtime story. And so she's the motherly figure that's telling us the story, right? And this is another way that we can see the story and understand. And again, I'm going to go back to Alien, but this time the sequel, Aliens, by James Cameron. See, James Cameron understood that Ridley Scott made nearly the perfect action suspense sci-fi movie. So you can't out Ridley Scott. So what does James Cameron do? He made an action film. Now there are tons of aliens. Remember, the first one's Alien, the second one's Aliens, because now there's a bunch of aliens. It's the threat is bigger than ever. But what they do to Ripley? They gave her a daughter. See, they expanded her personality now, because now the story is more about her and more about survival. But what did they do? They gave her Newt. And Newt is there to round out her character, to show that, you know what, although she's this real, just, she's a fighter, and she can be vicious, and she's smart, and she can overcome, now she's a mom, right? And she has to take care of this kid. And the kid, again, in a sense, is us, because we respond to the idea of a mother protecting you and guiding you. And so to make her character have more depth in this story, you have this, that's very, very thin story. You have to make her character more rounded. See, as the story gets thinner and gets not quite as great, her character has to deepen. Her character has to get a lot better. And that goes back to that first, City of Venus idea with Tartamella, where Vinnie made the characters very deep. They have a lot of motivation and backstory and hidden things. But the idea is the character has to be developed. The character has to have a point of vulnerability. And see, with her being a mom now, you don't have to beat her up and bloody her up and just destroy her as a person. She has a child, and that's what gives you the in. Because if something happens to this child, which the child starts out traumatized, and she's trying to help it, that gives her, that's the replacement for her being beaten to a pulp, is the child that she's protecting, the innocent child that allows her to be the heroic figure. And so as the story gets lesser and lesser, the character has to get better and better. It has to be really three-dimensional. That's why Terminator worked, because you understand the feeling of not knowing what's going on, like Sarah Connors does at first, where she doesn't know what's happening and all this stuff is happening around her. She's taking the place of us. But by the time you get to Terminator Part 2, she's developed as a character. Now she's been preparing and getting herself ready for Judgment Day and just working, and now she's muscled up, and she's become, and yet the first time she sees the Terminator, what does she do? She panics. She has depth. She's depth of character. And so that's the thing, is that you either need to create a really, really good story, or you need to create a really, really good character, and then have the character navigate the story in such a way that allows you to feel like there are real stakes. Because Newt could die at any time. She's small. She's damaged already. She's psychologically damaged already. And now you have this character who has to defend herself and another person. And so it makes her weaker and vulnerable. But at the same time, it brings out that, for no lack of a better term, mama bear sort of thing about her that makes her even more, makes Ridley more dangerous and more aggressive. And again, that's something we understand because we see that about our parents. You know, your mom could be the most quiet and gentle person in the world, but we've all seen her get mad. We've all seen her protecting her kids before. And there are others, not just Vinnie. Vinnie did a great job with all of what that he's doing. And he's doing Shadow of the Kraken now, which is a male lead. But there's another one that has a female lead, that Bonds, which has been, this has been being released digitally. I've been reading it for months and months. But Nyriam does a really good job with Bonds because the story is about more than just a woman who doesn't ever have anything bad happen to her or just faces some adversity. There's characters, there's depth of characters, there's her and her brother, there's, you know, the family dynamic, there's the wanting to become the alpha of a pack, it's a family drama being put into visual fighting narrative and using Wolfpack as the example of a family and the stand-in for it. And it has a lot of really good fighting and a lot of really good action, and it's drawn well. And the story is very deep. And so we have that sort of thing to it. But then there's also the example, and because somebody pointed it out even in the chat, of Perfect 10. And Perfect 10 is different in that it's more of a niche comic, because obviously Perfect 10, it's a fantasy. It is supposed to be, you know, this woman who's got this perfect body, and, you know, there's shots of her where you can she's practically naked, but there's a little smoke whiff going over her and covering her. And that is to titillate and to bring you in. And the thing is with Perfect 10, though, it still has a good story. It still has a good story. It's not like they just said, oh, here's a woman with a nice butt and big boobs. No, it still has a good story behind it. There's still this idea of this sort of, you know, futuristic, this crime riddled, this there's a conspiracy going on. There's other elements to it. So it's a good story. And then they use the cheesecake and they use the sexual appeal just as sort of a niche facade to give you something a little extra to where that you'll give it a chance, right? Because with a woman as the character, a lot of times you pass over things with women as a main. But if she's on the cover with a nice butt, you might open up and flip through it and then say, oh wow, look at this, it's pretty good action, it's pretty good, you know, it's pretty well drawn, pretty well put together. And so again, it's a good story. You can't just say, well, yeah, but I mean, it's just you got boobs and butts. That's not the whole story of Perfect 10. Perfect 10 is a well-written story that has a really good backstory, really good character, really good art. And it just so happens to be a niche cheesecake, you know, sexy sort of thing. And that falls into the area that I'm going to talk about with, we see, like, again, the beating up of somebody. For women, I struggle with the UFC's women fighting. I don't watch it. Sometimes I'll go over to my brother's and we'll watch UFC. I can't watch the women fight because there's something about that. There's something about seeing a woman bloodied and beat and battered. It feels wrong. And you could say, well, you're a sexist. That's fine. Maybe I am. I don't think I am, because I believe women can. I just don't. It just doesn't feel right. However, you can do it. If you're willing to go there, you can do that sort of thing. But I'm going to use the example of a way to do this and to have it where you don't have to do this and bloody her up in such a way. But you can have a female action star that is, you know, is what it is, and that is Atomic Blonde. Atomic Blonde is one of those things where they use sex appeal, they use trickery, they use all kinds of different things to sort of get you into it. But see, this is one of these situations where it's more of a style over substance. See, there's a way to do it, and one of the problems you have with Atomic Blonde is that we know intrinsically inside of us that this woman can't really beat up 8 guys in a small room, right? I mean, a regular guy can't do that. If Bruce Willis can't do that, unless you give him something. You have to give him a trick. You have to give him a bomb. You have to give him some sort of thing. And you have scenes in Atomic Blonde where the guys are clearly, they have to hold back. One goes at her at a time. They can't both go at her. It's the same reason why people don't like certain movies. There are certain Jackie Chan films that have that problem where the guys basically stand around and come at them one at a time. That pulls you out of the scene. That pulls you out of the story, because that's not how people fight. That's not real. But see, the Atomic Blonde gets around that because it's style. It's stylized. They do things to the guys like, shoot him so he's not quite as strong, or he's coming up steps so there's a disadvantage to it. We all know that if a woman, I can't find the picture, but if the woman where she pins the guy to the wall with her stiletto, that can't happen. I mean, you couldn't have a 200-pound guy in a stiletto pin someone to the wall, because as soon as you do that, your center of balance is off and they'll just push you over. That's not going to happen. But it's style over substance, right? Atomic Blonde is all style. It's all visually appealing. They use the sex appeal to sort of lull you in, and they use the lighting and the cameras and the music to get you to drop, to suspend your disbelief and drop all the other stuff out. And then they use really crafty photography and angles, and again, shoot the guy in the stomach so he's not quite as strong as he used to be. He's coming upstairs so you can kick him in the face and knock him back down the stairs. There are ways to get around it to where that you can have... And Atomic Blonde has a good story, but the movie doesn't really get into the whole idea quite as much. But there's ways to do it stylistically speaking, and that's something that I'm sure that... Now, Vinnie is all about story, so he wouldn't do that sort of thing. But you could do it. He could do it. We've seen his ability to create gorgeous women and gorgeous art. He could do that. He could just make it stylistically and visually appealing to the point where you just accept that this stuff is happening. It's another world. It's not real. We just drop all of our pretending like we care about what's real or not, and just say, okay, well, it's visually appealing, it's sexy, it's not meant to be on this earth. It's not meant to be something that could actually happen. And therefore, the style over substance actually allows you to get away with that. But that's another issue you have, like in a Marvel comic or a DC comic right now, though, is that you have approved body type, right? You're not allowed to do the J. Scott Campbell anymore and have this, waif thin with big butt and pointy nipple woman anymore. So you have women who aren't visually attractive in settings that aren't visually attractive. They're sitting around in drab apartments and eating and talking about coffee and stuff. And then they're supposed to fight, and there's nothing to pull you into it to make you suspend your disbelief. Storytelling is about story. It's about character. It's about tricking the person into accepting what you're telling them. And like I said, I've used various examples of how to do that. You have the character where the character is so well written that you put them in a story and the story unfolds around them and they react the way a character should react in that situation, and it brings you in. You have the character, and especially a female character, as a stand-in for the person reading. They're experiencing the story, and you're getting to experience it through them. And therefore, they don't have to be insanely well written and insanely deep. They just have to have enough of a logical backstory that a good story can be told through them, with them as the catalyst. And then likewise, you can do, which all stories should have this, and that is a really, really good story. A really good backstory, a really good world built around them. Background characters. One of the best things to do that will help every story is your villains need to be actually villainous. They need to be bad people. There's nothing worse than watching a movie or reading a comic that has a villain who they just tell you he's a bad guy. They say, oh, he's a bad guy. He's done horrible things. What's he done? Bad stuff. So, but if you actually see, oh man, this dude like shot some, helpless child or something, or, was the reason why a place was a nuclear bomb, dirty bomb was exploded in some city, or they're selling drugs to children, or whatever the thing is that we see as being awful. You make the villain really bad, and it makes you want to root against them. That really helps. And you have to put stakes. You have to feel like the character might lose. You have to feel like the main character might lose at some point. I was actually kind of expecting when I was reading Through the Woods that she might die at the end. And there might be something, like that, where we're watching her death and she's some sort of reincarnate or something. It ended differently, and it was not what I was expecting. It was really good. I really love, I've said many a times, I love Through the Woods. It's great fantasy light horror for like teenagers. I would say like young teens. I would say 10 and up. It's perfect for. But at the same time, you have like the Alien idea, which is it's a ensemble with a great story that you just happen to have a woman involved, and she brings her sensibilities to it. Or you have the mother figure, which that goes back to Greek thought also, because there was a story of what is her name? Persephone in Hades, and how that Hades like kidnaps her away. He sees her and she's so gorgeous, and she thinks she's the most gorgeous thing in the world. He kidnaps her away and takes her to hell with him. And then Demeter, her mother, goes on this violent rage to get her daughter back, and she goes through villages just destroying and killing people, getting her way. And that's a story that can be told, but that's a story that has depth, that has emotion. We've all experienced, if you're a parent, you experience that fear of where you're in the store and you turn for a second and you look back and your kid's gone, and that just fear grips you. Now imagine they've been literally kidnapped with the idea of being forced into a sexual union with somebody much older than them, or taken and now being held hostage and trying to be forced into loving somebody and becoming the wife of somebody, and they don't want it. These are things that we can grip onto and hold on to. The story is important. It's all about story. And so I asked the question, what is your story? What's the story you want to tell? You don't have to be some spectacular wordsmith to tell a great story. Some of the great stories of all time have been told in very simplistic language, with very, very everyday common verbiage and usage of language. But the story is intriguing. The story has depth. The characters need to be three-dimensional if at all possible. And when not possible, lean back on story. See, you can have a female lead, but there is going to be a little bit of a detriment in it. And that guys in particular, but even women, when asked, said they prefer guys as the lead characters in series. in comics, in books. And that's because we naturally gravitate towards a man overcoming and building and doing something heroic. But a woman can do it also, but you need the story to match. You can't just put a woman in a guy's place, because people will say, well, why is she doing that? But what's the point? Why would she react that way? You need to have realistic personalities, but you have to have really good stories. And whenever possible, and as much as possible, three-dimensional, fully fleshed out people with good backstories. That's your characters. So what's your story? Tell your story. You don't have to be amazing. Believe me, you write hundreds of stories before you get your first great story. I mean, people like to point out, that Orson Welles was 24 when he made Citizen Kane. Yeah, but he had been on the radio for 6 years at that point. He had been writing stories and coming up with stories for years at that point. You're not going to perfect it right away, but tell your story. Tell your story and do a good job. Don't worry about if it's a male or a female that's in the lead at first. Write a good story. And then if you say, well, I want to write a story about a woman, okay, great. Now decide how you want to approach that. And if you ever want to get into real deep into that, like I said, go to the Fourth Age and ask him and watch his videos. He has like years worth of talking about how story works and why it works and what it does inside of us. And so, what is your story? Tell your story. It's all about the story. And with that, I'll let you go. Thank you for listening. Take care. God bless. Love you all.